Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 29 of Diabetics for Diabetics Radio. Today's episode is titled, Has Anyone Ever Cured Diabetes? We're going to talk about the stories, tales, and methods of those reportedly able to reverse diabetes. We're going to talk about remission versus curing and all of the different scenarios that have been brought up over time about people who had diabetes and then didn't. And I think I think you'll probably be surprised too at how often that happens in its own way. So we'll talk about kind of the details of each scenario. So if we haven't met yet, my name's Bowie. I've had type 1 diabetes for over 20 years. I am healing my diabetes naturally. So I've spent the past 2 years really diving into the research, questioning everything that I've been taught up until now about the diabetic condition, and learning more and more about the things that I can do to influence my health outcomes. And I'm sharing what I'm learning along the way. And that's kind of where this podcast originates. If you are not following me on TikTok yet, that's kind of where I started my healing journey. I've got my handle there. Go ahead and follow me there. If you're not subscribed here, please do that now, and we will begin. So, most everyone with diabetes remembers that initial endocrinologist visit or hospital stay where you were told, tough luck, you got it, there's no way out. Here's what you can do to manage. These are the symptoms. This is what your life is going to look like. Here's this awesome technology. So it is unnerving, sometimes off-putting for people with diabetes to hear about instances where people stop having diabetes or stop at least having to treat their diabetes. A lot of the legalities behind medical terminology and liability in health professionals prevents people from kind of speaking in those big, broad cure terms, right? Remission is, we'll talk a little bit more about the verbiage behind remission versus cure. But there are multiple different stories for different methods involved in achieving remission in diabetes. And these are just a few: stem cell therapy, spontaneous remission or extended honeymoon period, dietary manipulation, gastric bypass or surgical interventions, and then alternative medicine. We'll talk more about the details of what alternative medicine means. But some commonalities in all of these stories is the fact that very few people know about them, right? And when they do come up and they do happen, they are like a flash in the pan. Whether it be a newspaper article, a website article, a video, people get really excited. They talk about this awesome information and all of the wonderful results that they've achieved. And then radio silence, and you get told how effective it was initially, and then you learn nothing about what comes after. So everyone with diabetes listening to this is like, oh, that's awesome. When does it get to be applied to me? And so we kind of get given the runaround without actually learning about what the fate of these people is. So, and then when it comes to understanding what remission means versus what being cured means, like what does it mean? What does a doctor need to tell me for me not to have diabetes anymore, right? Common sense tells you, well, I can eat without using insulin, right? And that's kind of like, that would be the coolest thing in the world. So what are these studies using as their metrics to achieve this so-called remission? So let's go ahead and get started with our first case. Just kidding. We're going to talk about remission. So depending on the paper that you are looking at, they have different definitions. So some have to do with their A1C. So if your A1C over the the prescribed treatment period and so many months after, your blood glucose average is below a certain level, right? So most diabetics are looking for something under 7. Like that's a good, with diabetes, A1C. A normative A1C is anywhere between like 5.2 to 5.5, I believe. 5.6 or 5.7 is I think the starting point of pre-diabetes. But so the ability to show that you can regulate your blood sugar without any extra treatment. They also measure your C-peptide levels. Now, C-peptide is something detected in the blood, and it is a residue of natural insulin production. So your level of C-peptide is commensurate with whether or not you are creating insulin. Now, I believe that those with what's considered normal C-peptide level is anything from 0.8 up to 5. And most type 1 diabetics, and this is changing now with the current climate of new, more and more people getting newly diagnosed with type 1. Most type 1 diabetics are somewhere around 0.2 or 0.3, so less than half of what the normal C-peptide levels are. But nobody likes to use the word cure, right? Cure is way too weighted, right? If you say you're cured, you definitely know that this thing that you did is going to help everyone, right? Cure is a very total term, all encompassing. You can't claim to have the cure unless it works for everyone. And so when people are talking about managing diabetes, remission is the easiest word that kind of takes the liability off of, having cured everyone. It's, and I also think that it gives the medical industry the power to insinuate that it could come back, right? If you're in remission, it's not like you don't have it. It's just not there anymore and it could come back. The same goes for cancer. If you beat cancer, your cancer isn't gone. It just hasn't come back yet, kind of thing. You know what I mean? So now I believe we will talk about our first case, and we will. So I remember this was in 2021. My boss at the time sent me the link for this article and said, "Oh my God, did you hear about this?" And there was this man, a 56-year-old man who had been diabetic for a type 1 diabetic for over 40 years in Ohio. And he had been going through some stage 1 clinical trials for a stem cell therapy. And he had he was off exogenous insulin, able to eat food without bolusing. He had normative blood glucose levels. The company that he was working with was actually called initially SEMA. SEMA was started by a Harvard geneticist whose kids had been diagnosed, and he went bananas trying to find this stem cell cure, and his company was bought out by Vertex Pharmaceuticals to kind of disseminate the cure, not the cure, but the stem cell treatment that he had started. It was acquired for like $950 million. So it was lots of money going on there. But Mr. Shelton, 56 years old, was injected with insulin-producing cells derived from stem cells. He had been undergoing the treatment for 270 days, using half of a full treatment of those stem cells, and he had been completely weaned off of insulin. In the meantime, though, he was prescribed immunosuppressants to avoid the rejection of those injected stem cells. And oh my God, you kind of like this is the fruition of all of that stem cell talk. We've been talking about stem cells for like 30 years without anything moving forward. So this is good news, right? And then throughout at least the New York Times article on it, they were a little bit reserved in terms of their optimism and used a lot of language that was meant to kind of like slow everyone's excitement a little bit. So this was a stage 1 clinical trial. Like I mentioned, it was half of the full dose of the stem cells. They emphasized that it was still years away from being able to be produced on a scale that could help the entire diabetic population. So they, it's like, oh, this is really good news. We're still years away, right? That's something we as people with diabetes are used to. Another point, this wasn't mentioned in the New York Times article. It was mentioned in another follow-up article, but Shelton, throughout, I believe during the treatment and post-treatment, he was taking 10 immunosuppressant pills per day. Now this, you guys know by now, I'm not crazy about stem cells for this very reason, because it doesn't actually address the cause of why our initial stem cells were targeted. But you know what? He can eat a meal without bolusing. So I'm sure plenty of people out there would be willing to take 10 immunosuppressant pills per day if it meant that they could do that. This next bullet point are direct quotes from the article itself. This treatment will be very expensive. So they are not at all holding back on letting you know that you want this, you and your health insurance are going to have to pay. So I mentioned SEMA, which was the initial company doing this research, was bought out by the pharmaceutical company meant to bring it to the masses for just under $1 billion. So, yeah, that Harvard doctor made out like a bandit in terms of getting his pay. And then afterwards, there was absolutely no follow-up. They published that article in November of 2021. I have not heard about him since. I don't know where he is. I don't know what happened to him. I don't know if he's using insulin or if he's not. Is he dead? I don't know. Anecdotally, I will say this. In one of my TikTok lives where I brought this case up, someone had mentioned that Mr. Shelton had passed away of something unrelated to diabetes. I cannot confirm that. It's complete hearsay. I don't actually know that, but there's been no news of it, right? Nobody knows if he's okay. Nobody knows if the treatment actually worked. What's going on here. And if you go to look up for any updates on those clinical trials that Mr. Shelton participated in, it is clear that the FDA shut down the second phase of the full dose of stem cells, because the first trial was only half dose. So the full dose, the FDA said no. Vertex Pharmaceuticals didn't know why, and there's been nothing ever since. So, it's, a flash in the pan, and the excitement kind of weaned. Now, so that's stem cell therapy. Now we're going to talk about alternative medicine and a boy named Zachary Swerdlow. Now, I heard about this through social media, I believe, and again, you have to go digging because it's not really brought to the forefront of any diabetic education. But Zachary was a teenager diagnosed as type 1 in 2007 or 2008. And his parents elected to take the holistic route of treatment, initially in conjunction with the traditional, like he was using exogenous insulin, he was measuring his blood glucose, he was giving himself injections, what have you. But they added on their own alternative mix. So they did holistic nutrition using medicinal herbs, chiropractic therapy, special mud packs and detoxification for very specific organs like the liver, the kidneys. He also participated with some antiparasitics to aid in digestion and immune health. The details of each of those things in terms of, okay, what foods, what herbs, was not super descriptive. This information that I got here was off of a documentary series called, I believe, The Incurables, which was like, kind of gave the vibe of a PBS series. It was not like a major production, anything. It was like local TV, just walking through how this boy did this. And again, the trail goes so quiet, but the whole point is he did, in fact, using all of these alternative methods, lowered his insulin usage to a point where he was not using any insulin. Post-meal, no long-lasting, no basal rates, no anything, off insulin. And that's where the documentary ended. It did not, there was no follow-up. This was 15 years ago now, so this boy would be, almost 30. So where is he? Is he okay? Is he not diabetic? Is he diabetic? I don't know. And his parents, ironically enough, are they have a YouTube channel. They have their own business, kind of in the metaphysical realm, consulting and things like that. They are woo-woo is not treated like a complimentary term, but they are very alternative in terms of their philosophies and things like that. And they have a YouTube channel and a website that advertise what they do. No mention of Zachary, no mention of their experience with diabetes. I have no idea what their status is, so don't know what any of that means. But when you look at each of the methods that they participated in, I'm a huge fan of this because this kind of falls in line with the things that I've been mentioning in terms of balancing multiple organs, focusing on diet and nutrition, as well as physical activity and kind of energy alignment. So multiple organ approach. They immediately went to cleaning out the liver and the kidneys because they were of the mind that the pancreas had been depleted because it was being overburdened because of lapses in other organs. So they kind of went upstream of the diabetes to allow for the diabetes to rest, quote unquote, rest and heal itself. They mentioned parasites. They did not mention what treatments they used for parasites or what specific parasites they were targeting. They talked a little bit about food. They were definitely low to no grain, low carb, lots of fruits and vegetables. And then for the chiropractic adjustments, they talked about how there are practitioners who are able to adjust vertebrae relevant to specific organs and opening up energy paths and innervation to organs. So did not get into special practices or how often they went or for how long it took. So no details on that, just the fact that these are the things that they participated in. Now, more specifics on the diet, and again, needing to be a little bit very aware of the terminology in treating, managing, remission, cure kind of thing. There is this paper that targets the ketogenic Paleolithic diet as means of successfully managing type 1 diabetes. And this was published in 2014. I believe in a Belgian a Belgian article, but I could be wrong about that. So a 19-year-old man was diagnosed with type 1 late in 2013. I believe it was November of 2013. He went through the classic onboarding for a diabetic, put on insulin, told what to eat. What to eat was relatively high carb, 240 carbs per day, 6 meals, 3 meals, 3 snacks, what have you. And he followed the diet for 20 days and he felt terrible. And his blood sugar was all over the place. He was using more insulin than he wanted to, apparently. So he sought out the authors of this paper to guide him through the Paleolithic ketogenic diet. So he was diagnosed in November. In January, he got his C-peptide measured, and it was at 0.6. Now, I mentioned before that a typical C-peptide level for a healthy, quote-unquote healthy adult is anywhere 0.8 and above. So 0.6 is low for normal, but relatively high for type 1. Type 1 usually somewhere around 0.2 or 0.3. This 19-year-old did present with the kind of the GAD and the ICA. These are the classic antibodies present in people developing diabetes or who are diabetic. So he kind of had all the signs of just passing the threshold of becoming diabetic. Now, he switched to a almost carnivore diet. I don't know if carnivore was a thing at this time, but his diet consisted of meat. He prioritized red and fatty meat over those lean meats. He ate organ meats, mostly animal. It would have to be animal fats because they specified that there were no plant oils, but animal fats and eggs. Quote, insignificant amount of vegetables. They didn't even specify what kind of vegetables. And the only supplement he used was 5,000 IUs of vitamin D daily. No plant oils or artificial sweeteners. And that's it. Pretty cut and dry, right? Meats, organ meats, fat, and eggs. And his results. So they read very promising. So they mentioned, and this is a month and a half post his diagnosis, or no, not even a month and a half, 20 days. So he did that kind of like typical high carb post-diabetic diet for 20 days, and then he decided to switch to this. The first meal after he went into the ketogenic, he was able to stop using insulin. After that first meal, his postprandial or post-meal blood sugar was only 86. After that, he never used insulin again. So they retested 10 weeks later to see what his C-peptide levels were, 2.2, which was very, the triple what it was when he was first diagnosed. And his A1C was 5.5. So huge improvements from just 10 weeks prior with the ketogenic. Now, some interesting points here. His antibodies were still present, both the ICA and GAD. So there was still some sort of inflammation, some sort of antigen activity with the beta cells or related to diabetes, but it was not affecting his blood sugar. His cholesterol went up and LDL went up, which is pretty common with the carnivore diet, but not an indication of anything to be worried about. No reported side effects. And this lasted, the paper was published after the patient had been on this diet for 6.5 months. No insulin, normal blood sugars. And so this is kind of what they presented. So pretty impressive, right? So tripling your C-peptide. So his body was producing more insulin. His A1C was down. Again, he wasn't using any carbs. It was pretty much just protein and fats. They made sure that the ratio was at least 2-to-1, protein and fat to carb. And yeah, I mean, those results are pretty promising. Now, my one thought on this is that this is, just like the title of the paper suggests, it is managing. right? Because like what would happen if he did start eating carbs again? Whether or not, it could be fruit, it could be the healthiest carb you could think of. Um, is that, is that going to affect him, right? Because the way I see it is, if you have to do this diet in order for everything to like be okay, how is that any different than being on a medication and always having to be on the medication? You know what I mean? To be healed for me is to be able to operate within a greater degree of variety. I think healing for me means that you are able to eat carbs and natural occurring sugars without it affecting your blood sugar adversely, instead of like, oh, I don't produce insulin, I can't manage carbs, so I'm just not going to eat carbs anymore. It's that to me means management, but that it's still incredible that the beta cells are able to regenerate to the point where insulin or C-peptide levels triple. I concede that for sure. So that's the Paleolithic ketogenic diet. But again, this is the last paragraph of the paper. In the standard care of type 1 diabetes, insulin is a cornerstone. It is important to emphasize that the Paleolithic ketogenic diet as a standalone therapy may be applied only in those cases with residual insulin secretion. So if you remember, this man was newly diagnosed. His initial C-peptide level was 0.6. Most advanced type 1 diabetics are somewhere between 0.2 and 0.3. And they finish, in cases with no internal insulin secretion, the Paleolithic ketogenic therapy may only be used as an adjunct to insulin replacement. Now, is this the author just kind of covering their butt by not saying, speaking in too much totality? I don't know, but it's useful. I think it's more useful for those just on the cusp of having been diagnosed than someone like myself who's been diagnosed for 20 years and has gone through that inflammation for so long that, I need to get my C-peptides retested, but someone with really, really low C-peptide levels. So still interesting. Now, the second one, we're going to transition to type 2 for just a minute, but there are still good pieces of this for both types of diabetics. So 3 main modes of treatment. The first is surgical weight loss interventions. There are plenty of papers talking about how obese and diabetic people who undergo gastric bypass go into diabetic remission. So gastric bypass is where they decrease the size of your stomach, so you're physically unable to eat the same amount of food. It's kind of like surgical calorie restriction in a way. And I believe that they do fat removal as well, body fat removal in that surgery. The second was primary care-led weight management. So this is, you are under the care of a medical professional who is guiding you through weight management protocols. And the paper I'm going to reference is talking strictly about calorie restriction. So these diabetics went to their doctor gave them a prescribed diet of limited calories. I believe it was somewhere between 800 and 1,000 calories a day, which is very low. But it did have positive results in terms of putting their diabetes into remission. And the second one, this is relatively new, but the short-term intensive insulin therapy. So this is where people brand new to type 2 diabetes are given insulin right away. They're given exogenous insulin right away because insulin itself is able to induce beta cell regeneration. Like insulin causes more beta cells to be made. So if you, just like with the ketogenic diet and type 1, if you are just past the threshold of not being able to manage your blood sugar, but you still have a greater volume of beta cells that are producing, giving more insulin is more fuel to kind of have that greater beta cell mass grow a little bit more. So I believe it was 4 weeks of giving themselves insulin for their meals, and then after that 4 weeks, stopping insulin and seeing how long they could go without going back on insulin. Additional things to consider in all of these interventions: what's your diet like, right? What's the food quality? Are you exercising? Are you doing anything additionally to address inflammation? And then again, what are the metrics that these papers are using to consider what remission actually is? So out of those 3 interventions, for number 1, which was gastric bypass, 72% of type 2 diabetics can achieve remission 2 years post-surgery. And I'll post all of the literature I used in the link or in the description so that you can look at what I was looking at when I got these stats. So again, 72%, that's pretty high. Primary care, number 2, primary care-led weight management got half of 306 individuals. So just over 150 diabetics who went through a doctor-led weight management calorie restriction diet were in diabetic remission 12 months post-intervention. 50%, right? Restricting calories. It all comes down to weight loss. It all comes down to mitigating inflammation. And then for number 3, for the short-term insulin intensive treatment, just under half achieved remission after intensive insulin therapy. And this lasted for a while. I think it was a year that they were testing those intensive insulin therapy. And for each of them, the authors were adamant that there were additional factors that influenced the success of the patients achieving remission. And that was that it was early intervention. Again, for the same reason that the Paleolithic type 1 diabetic had success, he had just crossed that threshold of not enough, where any addressing of inflammation and any kind of growth to the beta cells would be enough to get him back to a normal level or greater than that. So less than 2 years post-diagnosis with these interventions is going to get you a better degree of remission. And then this wacky, I don't know how I found this paper. It's just one paper. There are more cases of extended honeymoons, but this is the paper, Spontaneous Complete Remission of Type 1 Diabetes mellitus in an Adult, Review and Case Report. So this is one person. This just happened randomly to a person. We'll keep that in mind as we go through the details. So 32-year-old female goes to the doctor with thirst, frequent urination, blurry vision, what have you, all of the classic signs of type 1. She's got a 12.7 A1C. Her C-peptide is 0.7. So this is, again, she has just crossed that threshold. She's under that 0.8 mark. She's got the GAD antibodies for the beta cells, and she's immediately prescribed insulin. It's like, okay, you're a type 1 diabetic. She's onboarded. Here's your insulin, out into the world. Now, this woman comes back at her 4-month checkup, and she has not been doing what she's supposed to. The paper worded it as poor protocol compliance. So essentially, she wasn't taking her insulin. She was not eating properly, and the numbers reflected it. Her A1C got all the way up to 16.7, which is just insane. So her blood sugars were all over the place. She wasn't doing what she needed to. Now, what happens next was pretty shocking to me. So she goes to this 4-month checkup. She's not doing what she's supposed to. Her blood sugars are through the roof. Everything's getting worse. She goes to jail. So she gets arrested and she goes to jail And what does that mean for this poor newly diabetic woman? So this is straight from the paper. It said that during her incarceration, quote unquote, due to logistical issues, she did not take any insulin. No insulin. Now, I don't know. I've never been to jail. I don't know what the protocol is for type 1 diabetics who are in jail. I I would hate to imagine that the jail just said, "Hey, you don't get insulin." It may have been that this woman didn't say anything or didn't want it, didn't think anything of it, and so she just like decided not to use it at all. So no insulin, no oral medications, no nothing. She's in jail for 7 months. Okay, so this is just under a year after her diagnosis. Once she gets out of jail, she goes back to her doctor and her A1C is 5.6. What? 5.6 after being in jail for 7 months. And she did not report any DKA. She did not report any signs of hyperglycemia. For right after she got out of jail all the way to 3 months after, her fasting glucose is somewhere between 80 and 100. And even the authors of this paper were like, we checked to see if she had blood transfusions, right? Because maybe she's like swapping blood to show us healthy blood. No. And so she just kind of was like, I guess no more diabetes, or those beta cells kicked up again. They didn't mention C-peptide, I don't believe, to retest, but just weird. And this paper opened up another portal into a lot of other honeymoon stages where, you know, there's a science behind the honeymoon effect of diabetes where you're initially diagnosed, your body kind of throws in its last-ditch effort to produce enough insulin, and it does for a little bit, but nothing's done to address the inflammation, and eventually that kind of resurgence of beta cells is killed off as well. So now, with all of those stories that you have, you've got stem cells, you've got alternative health means, you've got health and diet, you've got calorie restriction and weight loss, and the honeymoon effect, just kind of throwing it, going to jail and saying, I don't want to take my insulin anymore. You've got a couple different ways of people who have achieved remission. Now, again, if you are to say cure, it has to be so total, it has to be so complete and applicable across so many different people. So most people only word it as remission. Remission is kind of incomplete, like it could come back, we don't know. So, but it happens more often than I ever was told, right? I just doing the research on this stuff, I was amazed at the sheer volume of stories of people getting into like 6 month, 1 year, 2 year remission of not needing insulin anymore. So it's pretty interesting. And when it comes to actually deriving value from these stories, like if you have diabetes and you're watching this, how is this useful to you? Look at the similarities in each of the stories, right? So there are a variety of effective means. There are a couple different ways to get this done. Stem cells and immunosuppressants. Is it diet? Is it cleansing organs? Is it lots of different things that you can look at. But the fact is, when it happens, whether it's documented scientifically or it's anecdotal, the people disappear. Where do they go? Why are they not sharing their story? You can use your imagination on that one. In that one, in terms of spreading treatment advice, I'm sure that the legality of that is pretty scary. But man, we get great news about possibilities and then nothing afterwards. So we're kind of left in the dark. You get your splash of hope and then nothing afterwards. So, and what they learn in those stories isn't built upon. So it's like with the stem cells, the phase 1 was a success in terms of getting someone off of insulin. Stage 2, kiboshed, not revisited. The alternative means seems pretty effective and pretty accessible. Never heard about it again, even from his parents. I don't know where the kid is. And then what else? So you have those weight management, with type 2 diabetes, it's, it's a lifestyle disease. You can get rid of it with your diet and exercise. Society itself is not particularly interested in getting you a cure. It's more interested in a quick fix, but we're not taking this information and applying it meaningfully. More and more people are getting diabetes. More and more people are inflamed. We've got to be able to kind of put rubber to road on the stuff that we're learning from this. So that's what we got for today. All right. That's episode 29, talking about the ways in which diabetes has been quote unquote cured or put in remission. I will link all of the literature that I referenced here, as well as the video for the documentary series talking about that family that healed with the alternative means. That will all be in the description. I've also got my own theory on the development, the actual cause of diabetes, the inflammation, the beta cell targeting, and the loss of insulin sensitivity. I've got it all documented in my ebook, An Ironclad Cause, Solving Diabetes and More. That will also be available via the link in the description. I've got nutrition guides, supplement guides on what I'm doing to address the root causes of my condition, as well as ways to manage the iron load. So I want to thank you all for being here. This is episode 29 of Diabetics for Diabetics Radio. I'm your host, Bowie. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.